Argentina, where they definitely have rather have dollars, or even Tether actually is super popular there. But yeah, the culture of gold is not dominant there. Not to sell all of them, I think, would be a giant mistake, but to take some profits at these points when it's high, so that you don't have to be afraid of what might happen. You don't need the price to go up, and sit for the next 6 months in order for your life to be okay. It's been over generations, continue to be a useful thing for them to go back to. And, we got spoiled in the West where, with this sleight of hand where the dollar was supposedly as good as gold. Interaction with the real world should happen as fast as possible. In your 20s, you're still very open to new ideas, but that window closes every year. So if you haven't exposed yourself to more of those things, it's much, much harder. Much, much harder. You probably only do it if you must do it.
Hi, Matt. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, everything's great. In Uruguay is where we're talking from. And, it's like on the other side of the world. Most people don't even know where Uruguay is exactly. They just know it's somewhere down there. So yeah, we live on a cattle ranch out here, actually.
I think Uruguay I only know from the Soccer World Cup. I guess that's the only way how I know it.
Yeah, soccer is quite the passion here. It is.
But before we get started with all the topics, maybe give me and the viewers a little bit of a background of who you are, and maybe also like what Bitcoin plays in that role, or why you are excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur, a college dropout. Started a lot of businesses over the course of my life, including a Irish pub and internet ad agency, and most recently, I guess, although this was several years ago now, was a marketplace for music royalties called a Royalty Exchange. During the COVID hysteria, we moved down to Uruguay and bought a cattle ranch here, and been here since, I guess, 2021. And, Bitcoin is something that got on my radar a long time ago. I think the first time was probably in 2010, when I bought some, although I lost it, for the record, on my computer. I didn't buy a lot of it. It was only like $20 worth, but it was under $1 at the time. And, but I was interested in the theoretical uses of it then, just the ideology behind it, as free money. I come from a background of, certainly, I wouldn't say I'm a gold bug. I'm not a bug of anything, but like I, understand Austrian economics and, the value of hard money and all of that. So that's what drew me to it initially. I kind of went much bigger into Bitcoin in late 2015. When I saw its first real use case in the real world. And that was, it's fairly up to speed on, what's happening globally and global economics. And I knew that, and one of the criticisms being weighed at Bitcoin at the time was that, hey, like 60% of all the transactions are in China. And people said that was a bad thing. Well, I knew that China just instituted new capital controls. So at that point, it made perfect sense to me why, there was most of the volume was happening in China, because people were using it to basically cross international borders and, get around capital controls. So that's when I bought it pretty substantially. And then it was about $600 or $700 at that point. And, unlike, I'd say a lot of people, I mean, I because I have somewhat of an investing background, I did take profits on the way up at different stages. And I think, I know you're supposed to hold forever. I know that's the ideology, but, no, it makes sense, because those difficult downdrafts that Bitcoin experienced washed a lot of people out of it completely. But because I sold some at the top, more than recovered, or near the top, more than recovered my capital that I had deployed. I didn't mind sitting through those low times. It was totally irrelevant to me. So, that's the advantage of taking some profits on the way up. Currently Bitcoin is like, it still holds the promise that it always had. And, with the world going into this debasing, it is the only way out. There are the only assets that will gain from it, or the only way to save yourself from it really is through hard assets. And, to be perfectly honest, I'm much more heavily weighted gold than I am Bitcoin at this stage right now. But those two serve the same purpose. Fundamentally, it's like some reprieve from, the debasement that must occur, that it's a stated objective of the U.S. government for it to occur. So So yeah, that's a little bit about my background, a little bit about my feelings on Bitcoin.
That's super interesting because gold surprised me this year a lot. I was not expecting gold to do this good. Were you surprised from the great performance it did?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you cannot be surprised from it. These kinds of moves are, I wouldn't say they're unprecedented because they occurred several times during the 70s, where it was over 50% appreciation in a single year. So it has happened before. But certainly in my, I was born in 75. So like in my awareness lifetime, there's never been anything like it. But in retrospect, it's not surprising because the system is unwinding at this point. And, you see, and who's the big buyer of gold? It's central banks, primarily in the BRICS countries. So, there is this bifurcation happening globally. And it seems that the BRICS countries are choosing gold in that more than anything else. At least the central banks certainly aren't carrying Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but that's the side that they're choosing. So it makes sense. It makes sense that gold is going to go up a lot from here still. And this drawdown in price, this sort of pullback we've had, I think is a great buying opportunity. Really, I mean, I hope it gets down to 3,500 again.
Yeah, I think it's way too early for central banks and Bitcoin. I think there's this weird thing that people want things to happen way earlier than it should happen. I think we now just got started with companies getting into Bitcoin. This is at the very early stages that companies are now buying Bitcoin. We have now 200 publicly traded companies that are a little bit more into Bitcoin. This was 0 public traded companies 5 years ago. This was really fast, in my opinion. And I think central banks are the Bitcoin has to be a lot bigger for central banks to even get involved. Like they have to be 5x or 10x the market cap. Bitcoin has to be 5x, 10x the market cap for central banks, I think, to even really consider it. I mean, there's the Swiss central bank that has MicroStrategy that is basically a Bitcoin proxy. It's like there's some small things, but I'm talking about big central banks like America or something like that. I think it's just way too early for that, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Bitcoin has matured very fast when you think of it. It's very young and it's matured extremely fast. The fact that it's, been accepted by the financial markets, that's part of that maturation process, I guess, that it's been taken on by many companies that use it as a treasury asset. I mean, even my little company, Royalty Exchange, this online music, royalty exchange is we have some a little bit on our balance sheet. It's not a public company, but yeah, we have some on our balance sheet. So it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's only going to grow from here.
Interesting. I loved it also that you said that you are not hodling forever, because I truly do think that Bitcoin is money, especially like for those people that use it. And this hodling, I get the idea behind it because it makes it easy for people to I just put money in there and hold on to it. And historically, this was the best trade you can possibly do. Buy and just hodl it and keep it forever.
The best trade was actually to sell when it had its big up cycles and buy again when it went down. I mean, that was the best. As long as you were smart enough to do that, that was the best.
Yeah, but isn't that for me, this gets in the sphere of trading where you kind of have to know when the top is and when the bottom. I mean, there's a lot of metrics that you can look at. There's a lot of things that you're okay, now it's overbought. Now there's a lot of those things. But most people are really shitty in this. And so especially for if you just have if you bought Bitcoin in 2013 or 15 for let's say $200 or $1,000 or $2,000, it really didn't matter as long as you didn't sell all of them. You made a bunch of money either way because it appreciated so much. So almost all strategies made you a bunch of money. But I don't know. I'm just not a big fan of trying to time the market or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I don't mean time it exactly. I'm not a trader per se, but basically the cycles of Bitcoin, were the way that it appeared to me, because I've been watching it for a long time, is that it was like a commodity cycle, and a commodity cycle might be something that's 20 years or more in the making, and the thing about Bitcoin is you could see it naturally compressed into these smaller cycles that were pretty obvious when people were so, I remember one Thanksgiving where like it was the only thing that people could talk about. That was when it got to like almost 20,000. It was like the only thing people would talk about that year. And, I mean, the sentiment felt so strong on it that it seemed like, this price rises were so aggressive there toward the end, as they always are when you have a blow off top, that not to sell all of them, I think would be a giant mistake, but to take some profits at these points when it's high so that you don't have to be afraid of what might happen. You don't need the price to go up, and sit for the next 6 months in order for your life to be okay. By taking some profits, it makes sense. I mean, I took some profits on gold mining stocks that I own, that had gone up a lot this year, and just because it made sense. It made sense. Even though, do I expect them to still go up? Yes, I do. But if you take profits, then it allows you to sleep at night. And I think that if you're all in on Bitcoin and only a hodler, my worry is that you actually get shaken out in those, especially if you're relatively new to Bitcoin, that during those downdrafts, you actually say, oh, I guess it wasn't real. I guess it doesn't always, go up. I guess it isn't going to make me rich. I'm too late. And you sell and you end up losing altogether. So it's trying to counteract that natural psychology that people have to sell when they shouldn't and buy when they shouldn't, based upon emotion.
I think that's a fair point, because like a lot of people get shaken out, especially when they they get in there and they buy it, because as natural those cycles go, there's the most interest in Bitcoin is when it's the highest. And so that's where most people buy. And then it goes down for like 1 year or 2 years. And, then people are like, oh shit, like I missed the boat on Bitcoin. And then they sell exactly when the next bull run starts.
Exactly. It happens so many times to so many people. And it's not just the Bitcoin market. You have to understand this is all markets. They go through these cycles, and, commodity markets are most similar, I think, in this kind of boom bust cycle that Bitcoin has. But so it was easy to see that if you follow, whether it be oil or gas or gold. I mean, you can see these cycles go through where you have these blow off tops. And the difference is it's much harder because it's over a couple of decades. It's much harder to see it than it is with Bitcoin. So, and a lot of times you just check your own feelings. Are you feeling like, going like, I feel like Bitcoin is going to conquer the world at this moment. At that moment is like the time that you probably should take some profits. At the point where you're like, man, I have some uncertainty, that's probably not the time to sell. And because you're probably feeling the same emotions that the crowd feels. And so just being aware of those, I think, can help you make good decisions. And so you're not all in or all out, but you have enough cash so you can always sleep at night, without any worry.
How do you actually think that those cycles will continue going forward as Bitcoin kind of matures? Because we've seen now, like 2025 was very different to 2017 or 2021.
It seems totally different now. And I don't think that it probably will not have those same wild cycles that it had in the past, is my guess, simply because it's been institutionalized, and there's upside and downside with that. The upside is you have a lot more people that are participating in it, but they're participating indirectly through these ETFs, or they're participating in trading futures or something like that. And so, and being institutionalized, it kind of removes that key volatility, but ultimately the price will be higher in the future. I think there's no doubt about that, simply because of the debasement that's happening with the currency.
That's super interesting. One thing that I'm always wondering, especially with people that understand gold a lot, the thing that happened with gold is that people stopped using gold and start using paper released on top of gold. Do you think there's a danger that the same thing, even though Bitcoin is digital and it's way better usable as like a money in a medium of exchange and all of those things, but do you think there's a danger when we have too much ETFs, when we have too many third parties on top of Bitcoin, that the same thing that happened to gold basically also happens to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is really it's not a currency, which is what was the original idea. It's a reserve asset now, and as a reserve asset, you don't really buy and sell those very often. Instead, you come up with synthetic ways to use it, to access it. And so, one of the most common ways you hear people will take out loans against a Bitcoin. instead. So like that's one way, for instance, that it could be done. And I don't like any of those synthetic means at all. I think you want to get as close to the source of these real assets as possible. It's why owning, Bitcoin directly and having it in self custody. Obviously, I'm sure you talk about those things a lot, make way more sense. And every layer you get removed from that, I feel like complicates the system. It might make it more convenient, but you get away from the fundamental asset and really the beauty of the asset.
Yeah, 100%. But I'm always wondering if this is a natural phase in Bitcoin, that we just like in the store value phase, that we're like in the financialization, monetization phase, where people frankly just don't want to sell it because they're like, if I have dollars and Bitcoin, I rather spend the dollars before I spend the Bitcoin, because the dollars go down and the Bitcoin go up in general terms. And maybe it's just like a natural point where people really hate selling their Bitcoin or spending their Bitcoin, even if it's offered, because they're like, I'd rather give them the dollars because the Bitcoin might go up tomorrow by 10% and the dollar definitely goes down.
Yeah, I think it's, is it a natural part of the financialization? Well, the financialization is relatively new, at least in the way that it's taken over everything in the last 30 years. But, I think it's much more a reflection of the cycle we are in currency debasement more than anything else. It's that, you don't want to spend the good money, you want to spend the bad money. I mean, and so you spend the dollar versus same, I feel the same way about gold and Bitcoin. Like I'm way less likely to pay for anything in gold or Bitcoin. I've never paid for anything ever in gold ever. I've never sold any gold ever. Because we're at that stage in history, I think, where the currency is being debased, and it's just becoming more obvious with gold now. And it's been reflected in Bitcoin, I think, for a while, where, Bitcoin is just becoming its massive growth that it's had in the last, decade, has more than a decade, obviously, but since I've owned it in any serious quantity, it's been a decade, has all occurred when it's kind of like just a repricing of it. It's just getting it to where, in the range of where it needed to be, it seemed to me. And I think that those big moves we've seen in gold this week are like the world waking up to that gold has been suppressed and severely mispriced for that period of time as well. So, but yeah, I think it's a reflection more of the debasement environment, that people would rather find creative ways and not sell their Bitcoin. If you're going to sell it for dollars, they don't want to, you definitely don't want to do that. But if you could trade it for cattle ranch in Uruguay, for instance, maybe you might consider it. It could be worth it for that, because it's a forever thing. It's a solid asset that gives your family a solid base. And that's what I did. So at that time, it made perfect sense to me to do that.
I am so shocked that when I started looking into Bitcoin a little bit over 5 years ago, I was not at all questioning the euro. And now I'm at this point where I'm like, how can anyone even hold even like 1,000 euros, even like a small amount of euros? I mean, obviously we all hold a little bit because we need it and it's for operational business. And then I get that point, but in any large quantities, like why do people really hold it? And I still know to this day, as you said, like the debasement is so obvious once you learn about it, but I know to this day people that have a lot of fiat currencies, be it dollars or euros. I mean, we see it now more and more that people in other countries like Argentina or like Turkey are rather using US dollars or euros because they're like, it's a lot better than their fiat currency. It's like a little bit better, but I'm still wondering, like, why are people still like accepting that there is like something like fiat for storing value?
Yeah, it's just like this. It's a cultural thing, I think, in one part. That we've grown up with the currency being okay, so we didn't really understand what was happening. Because it's being debased on a relatively slow basis, so it happens in the background. You don't really notice. I mean, it's becoming more and more obvious as inflation has affected everyone's lives, at least in the U.S., quite substantially. I mean, where prices have gone up so much since the COVID era that it's in your face, but people still have a difficult time explaining exactly what's going on to themselves. And I guess it's not so desperate yet that everyone realizes that what the problem is. But I'll tell you, I was just on a trip. I went to Azerbaijan and spent a couple days in Istanbul. And, I'd always ask people wherever I go, I say, what are you saving? What are you saving? And In Istanbul, the answer from the three people I asked there was gold. Right away, the answer was gold, and I said, "Oh, well, that's amazing." With each one of them, and they said, "Well, of course. I mean, because the Turkish lira has undergone really substantial inflation recently, and so they've been a victim of it. But the biggest thing is culturally, the use of gold goes way back. I mean, it's like so much in their cultural roots, the idea of sound money and the importance of sound money that they can't extinguish it from society. It's still there, and you have to be, in Argentina, where they definitely rather have dollars, or even Tether actually is super popular there. It's because that was like the obvious best alternative for them, and it did serve a lot of Argentines well to be in the dollar by comparison, for sure. But yeah, the culture of gold is not dominant there. In fact, not only that, not only do they save in gold, but every store I had to buy some anniversary gifts for my wife while I was there. And every store I went in to buy it, I said, "Could I pay for this in gold?" They all said yes. They all said yes. I didn't pay for it in gold, but I asked. So yeah, I think it's a cultural thing, really. If there are certain places that have this deep tie to it, that it's been over generations, continue to be a useful thing for them to go back to. And, we got spoiled in the West where, with this sleight of hand where the dollar was supposedly as good as gold. And then, we take away the gold completely and it's still kind of okay. There was a huge debasement, obviously, in the 70s that happened, but, this sleight of hand sort of continued it along. And so we got spoiled. Our parents got spoiled. Their parents got spoiled. And I think that we've just forgotten. We've lost our compass.
Yeah, I feel like they printed so much, and the main thing that saved them up until now was the technology advancement, where we had a deflationary force with better and better technology on humanity. And so rising prices were not as much because we have to not measure from zero, but measure from like -5 or -10, whatever, like the deflationary force is. And so we would actually naturally have a deflationary environment when you measure it in a sound money like gold or Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin is a little bit unfair because it's also getting heavily adopted. But so like in gold, it makes more sense to measure it, the deflationary force. And so it's so interesting to see that, because people don't get that prices should actually fall because we are progressing as a civilization and as a humanity. And they're like, oh, like it's natural that prices rise. I'm like, it's not natural that they do it. They should actually come down in the free market.
It should come down. You're exactly right. And it's not just technology. It's that, from the US perspective, at least, we also exported all of our industrial base to China. And that process was massively deflationary. It was hugely deflationary, where we got the advantages of essentially, their labor and capital formation, lack of regulations, all that stuff, which was a huge deflationary effect for the entire West, but the US in particular gave up its industrial base for that. Now it's attempting to recoup that industrial base. And in doing so, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to be massively inflationary for the US. And so while technology is helping, with AI and other things, and it does have a lot of deflationary qualities for sure, but that reindustrializing the country is massively inflationary. And so that makes the debasement trade, as it's called, something that has long-term legs.
But they actually expect now, because we've seen it's an exponential thing that the central bank expanding of the monetary supply. It's the debt that there's this famous debt counter that is now over $38 trillion dollars. It's massively exponential. Seeing the curve on that, it's just like you want to buy that stock, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, what do you kind of expect for the coming, let's say, decade or 2 decades of whatever time frame you think might be best suited?
Well, there's no limit to the upside price in either gold or Bitcoin. I think that's clear because of the dollar debasement. And I think there is no way out of it. The only way out of it is an inflationary course. And so that these massive debts have to be devalued substantially in real terms. That's the only way they're payable. It's the only way, and it's not just the 38 trillion. It's also all of the obligations that are owed to future generations, that are, or current, elders, for instance, are just totally, completely unpayable. The only way out of any of this is for the inflation thing to really get started. And I think what we're just seeing now is just the beginning. I mean, just the beginning. What's coming is going to be much, much worse from the saver's perspective.
Yeah, saving is it's I don't know how it is in America or like in Uruguay or like wherever you kind of see the people, but in Austria people still have the savings book. I have no clue how this is actually called in English.
Passbook, we called it.
It's crazy, and they get like 0.1 or like 1%, or maybe in a good one maybe 2 or 3%, and it's like you don't even hold up a little bit of inflation in that one.
No, you don't. It's so perverse because these people who are clearly doing the right thing, they're working hard to produce income. They're not consuming all their income. They're instead saving the difference, which is like the key to success in life, by the way, is to be able to do that. So they're doing that thing right. And on the other hand, the government is completely wrecking them, for the benefit of the state. Like it's just disgusting, frankly, what's happening with that.
How do you look? You mentioned Argentina before, and I found it interesting because what's currently happening in Argentina, I'm not that into seeing that, but I've seen in the last 2 years what Javier Milei did from afar away, and it was interesting for me because he's seemingly the first one that really tries to cut down spending and still gets re-elected, which was fascinating for me to see because I thought it's not possible for politicians to cut down spending and still be popular and be voted into office. And this is the kind of the only superficial overview that have on his presidency the last 2 years. But have you observed what he's kind of doing in the last 2 years there?
Yeah, I mean, something's absolutely good, and because he didn't have control over the Congress, the Senate and the Congress, it basically made it so there were great limits to what he could do. But in the last election, his party did really well, and so now he does have the tools of the Congress. So now will be the real test. The next 2 years will be the real test of what he supposedly had planned, but he did break a few promises, like it was going to come in and get rid of the central bank, and that didn't happen. And so Argentina has the cost of living. It used to be one of the cheapest places on earth. I mean, for living, it was amazingly inexpensive. Uruguay has always been considered, because it's the largest middle class in South America. It's been considered the most expensive by far of all of them. But it is more expensive today in Argentina, and this happened since Milei came into power. It was in 2 years. It went from being super cheap to really expensive, and so that's in that way, I'd say he's definitely failed. But in light of that, though, not just did he cut some of the benefits, the welfare benefits that were the government was producing, and some government jobs. Also, the standard of living of people has actually gone down, and yet they still elected his party for the congressional elections. So that shows that the Argentine people are so fed up with the other approach that had been in place for so long that they're willing to give him more time to try and figure it out. But the real test comes in the next 2 years, what he does with the power he now has to actually pass laws instead of just by executive order making changes.
It's just super interesting for me because I don't see, and maybe you know of something, but I don't see any other presidents or any other leaders of a country cutting in a big way. And as you said, it's not as big as he promised, like the central banks and like all these promises. And I remember with the chainsaw going through that. So like it's not as brutal as he advertised it, definitely. But I don't see any other ones even doing something close to that.
No, to me, this is really as important that he succeed, because those ideas, if he fails, those ideas will be discredited, and that's the greatest risk, I think, with him, is that if he fails miserably, if his experiment were to end today, the entire ideas of essentially a smaller government, less involvement in people's lives, cutting regulations massively, all of that would be totally discredited. So, believe me, I'm hoping for him. I really am.
Yeah, me too, from afar, but will be fun to see. Now the actual thing I wanted to talk to you about, actually, it's been already half an hour, is your book that you have wrote. I think there's also the reason why Sean Clark reached out to me to do the podcast. Now I haven't read it, but what is the book about, and what is kind of like the main thesis behind it?
Yeah, I got a copy here, so I'll show you. It's called The Preparation: How to Become Competent, Confident, and Dangerous is what the book is. Now, it's written between me, and I have two co-authors, and one of them is Doug Casey. And I don't know if you know Doug or not, but Doug is like a living legend. And as far as an economist, he's written a whole bunch of books in the past. But he's a speculator. He's a political commentator. He's a mentor of mine. I'd consider him really a philosopher more than anything else, frankly. But Doug certainly comes from the sound money background, but that's not what the book is about. The book is instead about something he pitched me on 12 years ago, actually, when we were in a car ride to lunch from his place in Aspen. He said, "Hey, Matt, I've been thinking about writing this book," which he called Renaissance Man at the time. It's like, he said, it's what a young man ought to do instead of going to college and wasting 4 years of life and all the capital. At least in the US, it's very expensive to go to college. Instead of wasting it on that, what they should do exactly instead. And he told me, so I asked him some more questions about it, and he said, I want the book to be basically be about the three most important verbs in every language: be, do, and have. And I really wasn't sure what that meant. I asked him some questions to follow, but didn't really get much more out of him. And but essentially what he meant, it took me a long time to really figure it out. Well, I should say this. 12 years later, or I guess it was 10 years later, I'm in a situation where my son is 17 and on the cusp of 18 and trying to decide what he should do. And growing up in a household where I'm a college dropout, I've been successful. So he didn't have the propaganda that fed to him that college was the key to success, which is what a lot of American households have. I didn't say college was bad, but I didn't. So he was really aimless. Like, he really wasn't sure what to do, but he was at a stage where he knew he needed to do something, and he wanted to do something, and he felt directionless and lots of anxiety and loss and whatever. And so seeing that in him, I called Doug back up and I said, let's talk about that book more. Let's what exactly is the plan? What do you think people ought to do? And so it comes back to these three verbs: be, do, and have. And, we are consumed as a culture, at least in America for sure, with having. We want to have a nice car, we want to have a nice house. We want to have more free time. We want to have a beautiful spouse. It's all have. And it's only made stronger through social media, I think, this have desire. But the truth is that have is only a byproduct of do. I mean, so focusing on have is a huge mistake because it doesn't even get you to the have. Doing does. Doing actually gets you there. But that isn't even the most important verb. The most important one is be, which is who you are. Like, what kind of man are you? Like, that's what really, because that's what really matters in the end. You'll get further along in life, it's very obvious that the be is what really matters. So essentially, that's what the book is about. It's about essentially how to develop yourself. So we kind of flip the main question that young people get asked. When they're little, you say, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? When they're really little, they might say Spider-Man or, a fireman or something like that. And as they get older, that question gets much more serious. And it's like, well, what are you going to do to pay the rent is kind of what the question is. And so we flip that question around from, like, what are you going to do with your life, to what kind of man do you want to become, and kind of instruct them from there about how exactly to achieve it.
That's super cool. I'm myself also, I don't even know if I should call myself a college dropout, because I went there for maybe 2 or 3 courses and then said, like, I have enough of that. So I never really even had an exam or anything like that. So I'm not sure if I started it and dropped out almost immediately. But it's interesting because people always say in America, college is expensive. And it's very true, because you spend a lot of time in there and a lot of money. In Europe, it's trickier because it's not as expensive, especially if an Austrian guy studies in Austria, you usually have to pay a few €100 per semester, for a fee, or there's a very small fee associated with that. The financial value is almost nothing, but there's a very expensive thing that you have to give. You have to give your time, and you give your prime time, your prime age, basically there, where you are from, 18, 19, 20, 21, something like there. It starts till 24, 25, 26, 27. Some people even till 30, 35, very long. And so it's even, I feel like, trickier in Europe because it doesn't cost directly something, but you're still getting diluted from your time. And so the cost of entry is lower. And for that, more people just go ahead and start studying. And all of a sudden, like, they're studying for 5 years and then they wake up with like 30 and they're like, oh, what did I actually do in my life? Like, oh, nothing. I have to start over now. And I see that a lot. And I would wish that college would be very expensive in Europe too, because then a lot of people would be forced to think before entering and not just blindly go in there and waste their time.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, most people, despite the cost in America, had up until very recently just gone with the flow anyway and gone into college despite those expenses. And so, which is why now there's like, is it $1.5 trillion student loan debt? I mean, people are burdened for life because of that. It's outrageous. And, but you're right. The most important thing is actually the time. Doug, my co-author, and by the way, my son also wrote part of this book because it's important to say is that what we do in the book is we outline exactly what you should do instead. I mean, exactly. So it's not just about the ideas. I mean, we actually have a specific course load of exactly do this. And my son has been our guinea pig for the last 2 years actually doing it. So, and if he hadn't, the main reason, my motivation for writing the book was because I wanted to solve my son's problem. That was the goal with the whole thing. But it became very clear that you could create a systematic structure that would work for anybody who is motivated to do something. And it does take a bit of courage because you're going against the flow of things. And so it does take courage, especially for the first step in it. But the time thing is the most important thing. You're totally right. Because at that age, especially, this book is written for young men. Not to say it wouldn't apply to a young woman, but young men have different characteristics at that age. Certainly. And, you're a young man, you have unlimited energy. I mean, virtually unlimited energy, which I'm 50 now. So I can tell you it changes over time. So you have unlimited energy. You're open to new experiences and ideas in a way you will not be in the future. You have no liabilities. You don't have rent. You don't have a car and a car payment. You've made none of these life's decisions that will later limit your choices. Okay, so at that stage, for you to then go and enroll in a university where they're going to, in the US, to be considered a full-time student, you have to take 12 credit hours a semester. That's 12 hours in a classroom a week. I mean, it's basically taking this young creative energy, and you still have this, and by the way, people doing the program that are actually in their 70s. I'm not kidding. So, I mean, literally at all ages, people are still doing it. But at that age in particular, to basically take all that energy and to take all that potential and put it on ice in a college for 4 years is insane. Actually, it's so damaging to young people, and they come out and they don't know anything about the real world. They've learned nothing, and they've learned nothing practical about how they can interact with the world successfully to create things. So it's a gigantic mistake. It's a huge mistake. And it was a long time ago too. My co-author, Doug, he went to Georgetown, one of the best colleges he could go to. And he went when it was not super expensive. And even he has thought from basically the very beginning that it was a misallocation of his time and capital. Like, he thought it was a mistake back then to go to the prestigious university when it was still inexpensive.
I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together.
It's so interesting. I have like literally thousands of topics that I would like to go in there, but I think the most important one, as you said, is the energy, and maybe even on top of that, or like additionally to that, or it's kind of within in the energy topic, is the creative energy, because I feel like the school system and then university gives us almost like a filter, almost like classes, how we should view the world. And you can take them off still, even if you went to college for like 5 years. But it's harder and harder, and you get those filters on, and all of a sudden you're no longer that open to new ideas. You're no longer that energetic about like new things, because you are more likely to say like, oh no, I learned that in school differently. I mean, Bitcoin is a great example. If I bring Bitcoin up to young people that haven't gone to university, way more open than people that have gone in an economics degree and say like, oh yeah, no, Bitcoin cannot work as that and that because we need like inflation and all those Keynesian economics things. And in a weird way, if you have gone through that route, first you have to kind of unlearn all the BS that you've learned and then kind of go on your own route. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so the creative energy that gets lost in those prime years, in those how did you say, like in the infinity energy years, where you just have unlimited energy. This is so important, because this is your biggest strength. Like if you're like I'm very young, 27 right now, but if you're like between 20 and 30, your biggest strength is your energy and the openness to new ideas, because you don't have experience, you don't have a network, you don't have any, you usually don't have money, all of those things you don't have that you hopefully then have with like 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 and 80, 90 and all of that. But you have extremely high energy and you can work on big projects, long hours, you can work a lot and you can actually build something. And I think the most important thing is, so when I now slowly look back at my 20s, I mean, I'm still in there, but if you look back in the last like 7, 8 years, the biggest difference between the people, like there's people in my life that are more successful than me in my age, and there are a lot of people that are not as successful as me in my age group that I've kind of followed over the last 10 years. And the biggest difference between those that are more successful than me and those who are less successful than me is those who are less successful than me just went the traditional route, went through the traditional kind of system. And those who were more successful basically said, hey, I want to go my own route. And they collected more experience, more real world experience. And they are, how should I say that? Maybe an example is interesting there. If I go to someone and say like, hey, like we can do this and this, they're more saying like, oh, this is very hard. Like, for example, opening a company, like this is very, like you need this and that. Like it's also too complicated, and they are complicating things and they're making things bigger than they really are. Someone that goes ahead and is like more of a free mind, saying like, oh yeah, like I fill out those forms and like I make that, and all of a sudden I have a company. Like it's not that hard. Like I made a company in Austria. I'm co-founded a company in America, even though I'm not even American. I was in America 2 times and I have a company there. And so things are easier than they seem for the free mind, because they just go ahead and research. Oh, like what do I need to have a company? Oh, I need those free forms. I need a bank account. Okay, I get that. 2 weeks later, I have a company. And other people are like, oh, it's too complicated. I don't know. This is just a small example, but I think if you're not a free mind, you have weird barriers in your mind that make it harder for you to see an easy path. I don't know if this makes sense.
No, I think it makes total sense. The way I would think of it is, if you have been institutionalized your whole life, so you go to, before college, school that entire time, where basically life is set up within a very limited structure. These are your choices within this structure, and everything is very abstract. It's an artificial environment, and the longer that continues in your life, if you go into college, and then especially if you go into grad school or something like that, you basically become, you haven't yet had the opportunity to actually interact with the real world to see what actually works and what doesn't work. And when you do begin to interact with the real world, you learn a lot. Like, so you not going to college, you're in these situations and you're like, well, I have to do something, so what do I do, first of all, which people often don't ask themselves that question seriously until later, right? And then you go, well, okay, well, I'd like to do these kinds of things among, the things I can imagine. And then you start going, well, how do I do it? And no one's there to tell you exactly what to do. So you have to figure it out. And this is like part of living, actually, is that you actually engage with the real world, encounter problems constantly. And your job is to solve those problems. I mean, that's what so that interaction with the real world should happen as fast as possible. And if you are in your 20s, you're still very open to new ideas, but that window closes every year. So if you haven't exposed yourself to more of those things, it's much, much harder, much, much harder. You'll probably only do it if you must do it, because everything you don't know how to do in the real world still. So everything's been institutionalized for you. Even if you get a job coming out of college, right? Like, so this is what everyone is doing. You graduate from college and then you apply to these people who will hire you, and then your employer provides the workspace for you. They provide the parameters of success for the job. Everything is given to you within certain parameters, and you can exist and in fact thrive in that environment and have no understanding of how anything in the real world works. Nothing. You only know the artificial parameters that are set out by authorities for you to engage in the world. And so I think you end up being an idiot in that situation. And it's hard not to be, because you can, and still be successful, by the way. You can still be successful in that, and know nothing about how the real world works. So what we do is we aggressively put people into the real world where they learn actual tangible skills. Many of them have real economic value that you could then turn into a job if you wanted to. But they grow. You're forced to grow very quickly, because you're thrown in new environments every 3 months to gain new skills, and then you move on from there, and again thrown in another new environment where you gain new skills. And I can explain like the way it's broken down if you want. But the other thing that's really important is that the whole focus on being institutionalized. When you are institutionalized, you have to understand this. If you've only gone to school and now have a job, you probably live in a very institutionalized structure. There's a lot of things you're probably missing. The thing is that you never get confronted with the most important question, which is this B question. It's what kind of man do you want to be? And, working to solve that question, or working to answer that question, I think is way more satisfying. And it gives you a moral compass. It gives you a rudder to know what is good and bad in the world and what's a worthwhile pursuit. Because frankly, pursuing a job, something to pay the rent, is not even a worthwhile pursuit. It's not worth trading your life for that. it is worth trading your life to become the man you want to become. Like, absolutely. And I guarantee you, if you become that man, you will not have a problem with income. It will sort itself out just fine.
That is the biggest thing. And I can confirm that 100% with my personal experience, because I've gone out of my normal job that I did, which I learned a lot in, and which I'm really grateful for, because I was in sales. I did expand into a new country with the branch, and was almost, like, not on paper, but almost a CEO there. And so it's very far away from a normal job. It was like a 3-4 year old startup. So you learn a lot in there. But still, it was like a very steady job that gave me an income like every month and all of that. And then going out of that, before I went out of that, I had like weeks of sleepless nights of saying, like, I've been in here for 6 years. It's I can count on the money, and how can I earn money myself and all of that. Even though I already earned some money in the internet with like podcasting and like with my Twitter and in the Bitcoin sphere, I already earned something, and I still was concerned about that. And then I jumped and I just did it, and then I did the jump because I had Bitcoin savings, and I was like, I can live from them at least a little bit. And so, and I never had to touch them. Funny enough, I really had planned for them, for those savings to support me for like 1-2 years, but I never had to touch them because I figured it out. And if you have the full day for yourself, you would be surprised how much creativity and how much things you can actually do in those 24 hours. I mean, maybe you sleep 8 hours, so you still have a lot of hours left.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I should say, having a job isn't a bad thing, because sometimes it's the best way to learn. Sometimes it is the best way to learn. So I'm not like criticizing. I'm not saying everyone has to be an entrepreneur, although you probably should be. I think it's much more secure in the future, being an entrepreneur, frankly, than being an employee of anyone, especially with all the AI stuff that's coming down the pipe. I mean, the whole job market's going to be completely upturned. It already is beginning to happen. So, yeah, but I totally agree. I mean, at the end, we have this existential desire to like do something, to be somebody, and from a young age, that a young man does, at least, that in order to be somebody, you have to do something meaningful. That doing is the path to getting there. But the problem is that there's no options that are put out in front of young people to say you could do these things, and these things are meaningful, and everyone will recognize them as meaningful eventually, and you will become somebody by doing them. And that's what we attempt to lay out very specifically throughout the book.
I think thinking long term is probably the most for me, one of the most important things here, and thinking of like, what is the skills required for me to learn in this job to make it in 10-15 years. And so like not working in a job to earn, but working in a job to actually learn something.
100%.
For me, it's like, how do you teach this young man to think long term? Because I see that not a lot of people actually do that when they are 25. They usually think about the next month and not like the next decade.
Well, it's very hard to imagine the future when you're young, because you don't even know what's possible. I mean, you really have no idea what's possible. I mean, I say this for myself. Like, I've never been a big goal setter, and the reason is that I realized early on that I can't even, if I set a goal, I would always set it too low, because I couldn't even imagine what could happen. If you just kept instead pursuing the right thing, like pursuing, well, really virtue ethics really is a big part of it, creating value for others, things like that. If you pursue the right in the moment activity consistently, it does produce those same long-term results. So the long-term there are some principles about the long term you want to teach people, and we do in the book. The idea, we teach them real economics. The idea, because economics is really the study of human behavior. That's what it really is. So it's economizing is the choice of all the different choices you make throughout the day to do something or not do something. That's economizing, and you teach people about essentially the value of thinking long term as part of it. I mean, just the basic economic concept, of delayed gratification, the value in that, and having a low time preference is the economic term for it. If you have a high time preference, that means you want to consume today, and you want to consume as much today as possible. But the consequences of that is that your future will be worse than today. If you have a low time preference, then you value tomorrow higher than you value today. So you're willing to do things for the future. So we explain these concepts to young people, but the biggest thing I think is focusing them on the things that matter, the virtues that and we have a whole thing where actually you develop a moral code or a moral compass, your own, based upon this. So we have people go through this exercise where they, I don't know if we have enough time to go into it, but that is the first time in someone's life when they really start to we start thinking, this is what matters to me as opposed to what matters to my parents or what matters to my friends that are around. Like, these are the things that, inspire me and motivate me. And these are the standards I want to hold myself to. And that's like the first beginning of the individual identity, honestly, from the crowd. So, yeah, there is a way to teach it. I mean, my son is proof of this. You have to, and I could brag about my son. He's very impressive now at 20. He's gone from being a boy that was high anxiety, was very uncomfortable, didn't know anything about anything, to somebody who would now or describe in almost every way as a man, like a full man. The last step he has to make is having children. I think is kind of the last thing that puts you completely over the edge in that. But he's there already, and it's just been 2 years. And he's very impressive. Nobody who meets him does not think he's impressive, but he wasn't 2 years ago. And it's just by him having the courage to follow the process and learn all these very valuable skills along the way, have some incredible adventures along the way, and really experience what all men really crave, which is like this hero's journey, this process that you go through that you come back different from, is a big part of it. So it does work.
I think what you said there in the middle is interesting, because a lot of people just do what the parents did, like in some way, shape, or form. How hard is it? Like, what did you see that how hard it is for people to actually break free from that and going maybe a little bit off the route of what the parents said, or maybe even like go completely against what the parents are kind of doing?
Yeah, that is tough. So the first part of the book, I try and dispel some of the common myths, really, that people have about success, about how it really works. Like, everyone I know who is ultra successful did not go through a process of climbing these ladders, climbing the ladder, first the academic ladder to get into a good college, and then getting good grades while you're there, and then going into a career and climbing that career ladder. None of them follow that. Those ladders are not set up for your success. They are set up for the institution, the powers that be. So we point out that idea to people, that that process. Like, you should ask yourself, when there's some ladder you're supposed to climb, like, who put this ladder here, and to whose benefit does it exist, and what's at the top exactly, and what happens next? There's always another ladder, by the way, at the top of any ladder. It never really ends. So we dispel that myth, and then there's this concept of mimetic imitation, essentially, that occurs, that humans don't really know innately what we want without really thinking about it deeply. Instead, we look to others to figure out what we want. This is why fashion trends occur. We look around and everybody's wearing bell bottoms, so now you're wearing bell bottoms. You don't even know why. This mimetic desire is really what drives the motivation of most people. And once you see it, you see the crowd is all doing this. And so you actually come to want the things that everyone else wants around you. And just by understanding a couple of concepts, actually, that kind of breaks the spell. You can see that this isn't really what you want, it's just what you thought you wanted, because everyone in your class, for me, it was like everyone that I knew was going to college. So of course, why wouldn't I? I didn't even think about it. I go, well, I guess I go to college, because everyone did. This is what everyone did. So of course it must be the right thing to do.
It's so hard. I see it so many times, and so many people struggle with that. And they're so set in their ways, and they don't even realize it. I saw it a lot with old friends that I've met again after some time. Like my close friends obviously develop differently, because otherwise they probably wouldn't have been my close friends. Like, people that are differently, they kind of come together at some point. And so when I meet old friends that I haven't seen for like 5 years,
I'm almost diving into a whole different world. I'm like, how can you like think that, like, what, like, it's so crazy for me to see. Like, it's very fascinating for me to like go back in there, like, oh, that's how I thought 5 years ago. Oh, you're still there. Interesting. It's like, it's fascinating for me.
Yeah, and it's really weird. I totally agree. I mean, I remember running into an old high school friend, maybe a decade or so after we graduated high school, and by then I'd started to have some success as an entrepreneur. And I just ran into it. Was back visiting my hometown, ran into him at the grocery store, and he was a software developer for John Deere, actually. So I'm from this farming area, which has John Deere's corporate headquarters is in. And he was working as a software developer there. And, we were just describing what each of us have been up to. And he says, he tells me that there was a lot of the development jobs were being offshored to India. And he was, and that their team was doing that. And he expressed some concern about his job, in the future, because if this was happening then. And then within minutes after that, just a couple of minutes, he says to me, Matt, I could never do what you did. It just seems so risky. And I said, listen, man, I'm not worried about anybody giving my job to someone else. Like, to me, I look at what you're doing and it seems so risky. Like, you even describe the risks. Like, I know I'm going to be fine next month. You're unsure. But yeah, so even this cognitive dissonance that they find themselves in is so hard to see, because all of their peers are doing the same thing. So it looks like the right thing to do. And, that's it's very tough. But I think that by following what we outline in the book, I think because it throws you in so many new experiences with totally new people, you don't get swept up by this mimetic desire, being locked in with your peer group the entire time of your life, which is what most people experience.
And AI is coming for you. If he is concerned about the Indian people, like, he should wait till AI is coming around.
Oh my God, he's got to be so scared today. Honestly, yeah.
I want to touch on one more thing that you said. I wanted to touch on like many more things, but like one thing is interesting, the goal setting aspect, because I also have like a small personal story on that. I think I might, in now 650 episodes, I think I've never actually told this on the podcast. I made a video with 18 years old, explaining what is my goal for how my life should be when I'm 30 years old. And it was very funny, because in that video, I go through different segments of my life and like what each should look like. And at the end, I also had some financial goals. And I reached all of those financial goals with year 21. and not because I did very well, not because I was like really great. It's just that I wasn't even aware what's possible. But the interesting thing, because I set this goal, every month I tracked it, and every month I was very focused on that. And all of a sudden, like, what you focus on, what you give attention to, things grow. And it was just interesting for me. And I might show this video once on the channel, because I think it would be very funny seeing that. But it just shows me, and it was such a confirmation of what you say. With 18 years old, with 20 years old, like I think even now with me, with 27 years old, you really don't know what's possible in 10, 20, 30 years, because you get exponentially better in all of it, and all the things, the resources that you capture, they all kind of play into together if you play this whole game right. If you just
doing the right things.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to reiterate that of like goal setting and what you might kind of like advise for that.
Yeah. Now, I'm disoriented toward my behavior rather than goals long term, simply because I realized, like you did probably, where at 18, you'd already achieved by 21 what you thought would be way down the road. I realized that probably nearly in the same time frame as you did. And I realized then, well, I'm not sure that setting these goals is necessarily the right thing, because I don't even you're supposed to set a SMART goal, right? Something that is realistic and all that. But the problem is that when I'm so dumb, like, I can't even predict the future well enough, that I don't think I have any business setting goals like that. So instead, my goals became on my conduct, my behavior, the values that were important to me. And those things, that creates a virtuous cycle. And over time, it absolutely compounds and grows in this almost exponential way, just like you're describing.
Really interesting. One more thing I wanted to get into. What do you kind of see for Bitcoiners in general, what they can learn from the book? I mean, you have been in the community a little bit. You have interacted with a few Bitcoiners. Is there something that you think that the Bitcoiners that, like, my audience is almost exclusively Bitcoiners because that's the main topic I focus on. But is there anything that you see Bitcoiners are doing that what is there, like, they could benefit from your book, or what they can kind of take away from your book?
Yeah, I mean, it's geared for men, and like I said, I think a woman could benefit. But if you're a Bitcoiner, I'm 100% certain you could benefit in the same ways that anyone else could. And there's one actually extra risk that Bitcoiners have that I think that other people don't have. I think you have lots of advantages, but there's one disadvantage, and the disadvantage you have is that the success of Bitcoin has made it can become a crutch in a way. It can become the thing that you're oriented to only, and just that is in the having era. Okay, I mean, in these verbs, it's all in the have, and that's not where the magic in your life happens. The magic in your life happens by you using the one thing that you have total control over, which is doing things that are interesting and that help develop your being, that make you the man you want to be. So my worry for Bitcoiners only, like there was 1 week with Bitcoin where I made maybe a little over $2 million in a week. It was one of those blow off kind of things, just a huge run up. And it made me depressed, actually. And the reason it made me depressed is because I'd been an entrepreneur building businesses. And I remember to get that amount of money the first time cost me 15 years of my life. Now, did I regret what I'd done? But the obvious answer is, well, why would I start a business? Why would I do all these other things? I can make that much money in 1 week, the thing that I literally traded 15 years of my life over. And I thought that contrast is a potential problem, because there are so many people who are only focused on Bitcoin, and it doesn't make sense, rational sense to them, for them to do other stuff because that thing is working so well. But that's a gigantic mistake, because your life cannot be oriented around that. It cannot be only oriented around that. It's got to be oriented around something of higher value to your soul, which is becoming the man you want to become. Like, that is a worthwhile pursuit. And so while you have the Bitcoin, like, it's going to do its thing. Like, literally, you don't have to worry about that. It's going to do its thing. So use that to empower you, like you did when you had it as a safety net. What made you feel comfortable taking risks. Like, if you're a Bitcoiner, you should be more comfortable taking more risks, doing more shit than everyone else out there. And, you have no excuses, but you let Bitcoin do what it does. And in the meantime, use your energy and channel it as creatively as possible and becoming the man you want to become. And your lever to do that is by taking massive action.
I just was curious because you said it's mostly for men. I just checked in my statistics. 92% of my audience is male, at least according to YouTube, which is also what I usually see when I go to conferences and people coming up to me. So probably it's true. And then, interesting enough, actually most people are around like 40 years old. So that seems to be kind of the average. So like 35 to 44 is the biggest category. The second biggest is 45 to 54 actually. And the second biggest is then 25 to 35. So like, probably like 44, 32, something like that is where the average is. So, interesting. Anything additionally now that you know those statistics?
Well, I'll just say this. I'll say that it's not too late for you if you're older. I think that's the biggest thing. If you still have this sense that you haven't had that hero's journey, that you've not yet done the thing that makes you clearly understand exactly who you are, where you can stand in the face of anything of life that brings you, and you can with not quiver and not worry, because you know that you are capable to handle it. If you're not, if you went to college and you've had a successful career or not, like, it's still not too late. It's still not too late for you. And I think that I would be shocked I haven't heard yet anybody who has gotten the book and read it and didn't think that it was incredibly valuable for them. I mean, I haven't heard one yet, and not a single one. I do have one troll who actually said something on the Amazon comments or the reviews. Yeah, but I'd like to talk to the guy actually, but anyway, yeah, people love it, and so I think if you're hearing this, you know what I'm talking about with this unscratched itch, this thing that you know is missing but you can't quite define. I think we kind of lay that out, and yes, the focus is so I wrote it for my son, at the stage of life he was at, so with a very particular plan for people at that age, but if you're older and have more experience, you can take it and see exactly where it's applicable to you right now. So I encourage you to give it a shot. It's on. I mean, you can get it if you have Kindle subscription. You can get it for free on that Kindle Unlimited. If you're a subscriber to that.
It's super interesting because I think a lot of things that we should teach young men, we should teach to the world. Basically, like there's like the same principles. If you want to teach someone something that is now 20 or 25 years old, this probably also applies to most like 50-year-old people. It's probably not that different.
You're totally correct about that. I agree 100%. And honestly, 18 is too old, really. I wish I'd started this stuff with my son earlier, frankly. This isn't age restricted. It's just, this is targeted to a specific audience, but most of the comments you'll see are not people that are 18 to 25. They're older men than that who are not the comments, but the reviews on Amazon. You'll see most of them are older.
One other thing, just I think if you don't have trolls somewhere, you're not pushing hard enough. I think like trolls are kind of like a confirmation that you're doing something right.
You're totally right about that. I remember, a long time ago, I was talking to a friend who was a huge fan of Oprah Winfrey. I don't know if you know who she is, so you might. And I have always, for some reason, hated Oprah. I don't know why, but I just don't like anything she's about. But it's almost like if you're really successful, you're going to have equal balance of haters and people who think you're doing well. And if you don't have haters, then you do not have people who really support what you're doing either. So I totally agree.
Yeah, it's I think Cristiano Ronaldo put it so nicely. I don't remember the exact sentence, but when he said it, I loved it so much. He said something along those lines that the boo voices in the audience is the ones that really give him the power to run fast and like to hit hard, because this is really the energy where he gets it from. If everyone is cheering for you, it's kind of boring. But if someone really like hates you, it's almost like more fuel for your body. And in the first half year of my YouTube channel, I had no haters, and I was like, oh, I'm probably irrelevant still. And so the more haters you become, one thing I wanted to already close it down, but if you hopefully you have time, one more thing is that you said also becoming dangerous. Is that the direction with the haters and all of, like, is that the direction you mean, or was there something different behind that meaning?
It wasn't related to that, but certainly that is what I mean by dangerous. Ultimately, you should be able to obviously physically defend yourself, if you need to, and like the book is divided up into cycles, and like my son's done a bunch of BJJ and some kickboxing, but his next cycle in January, he's going to Thailand and he's going to study Muay Thai for 3 months at a camp there. So you should be able to do that. But what I really mean by dangerous is that there is nothing more dangerous, I think, on earth than a man who knows who he is, and has the ability to interact with the world successfully. This is like the most masculine characteristic. It's not like a giant roided out freak, or an MMA fighter that can kick people's asses. It's being able to say no. Like that's the most masculine thing there is. Like draw the line, say, nope, not going to do it. Nope. Can't make me.
Jordan Peterson talks about that so brilliantly, where he talks like discipline is having the ability to
to be dangerous, to actually have the physical capabilities to f someone else up, but still not doing it. That's like the real discipline. If you have no strength at all and you're not punching anyone, that's not a discipline. It's just a logical sense because you cannot even do it. But real strength comes from having the ability but still not acting on it. That's real discipline, and that's where where you are really becoming a dangerous man. I think Jordan Peterson talks about a similar concept. It's really interesting. We have a question that I ask each and every one of my new guests, and maybe it's less related with you. I will still ask you and see what your answer will be. The question that I ask each and every one of my new guests is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Well, so I have a podcast I do with Doug Casey, who's my co-author in the book, and he's an older guy. He's 79 years old, but he is a genius. I mean, he's a philosopher. He's great. So, we talk about geopolitics and economics in that podcast primarily, and that's called Doug Casey's Take. And I'm just trying to extract publicly the wisdom from Doug, and I offer my own comments, but it's really about him. The other thing is we have a newsletter called crisisinvesting.com, where basically we cover the financial markets and we make specific investment recommendations that are not Bitcoin, but it's usually oriented toward the resource stocks and things like that, gold stocks, stuff like that. So about economics, if you want to, certainly we have a lot to teach on that side of things. Other than that, because we got this cattle ranch, I'm still learning. We're only 4 years into it now. But I know a lot about regenerative cattle at this point and raising cattle, and I've started dozens of businesses as an entrepreneur, so I think I'm pretty qualified to help people with that stuff too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have an routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, what year do you think Bitcoin will be over $1 million US?
I think certainly by 2032.
Very close to what I also think, 2030. I think I always look at maybe a little later. Maybe I'm a little bit too bullish, but I take it either way. Really cool. Thank you so much, Matt, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you and your book?
Yeah, the preparation is available on Amazon.com. So pretty much anywhere in the world, you can get it through Amazon. If you want to just follow more about what we do generally, you can go to crisisinvesting.com. It's a Substack, so you can sign up for free and just read our daily emails. I'm on Twitter at Mattpheus, Mattpheus.
Really cool. Thank you so much for being on, Matt. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.